Hello and welcome to another episode of the other Ranting Atheist. Yes, I'm not the only one out there, and I'm really happy about that. So, what will I be ranting about today? Well, firstly, my rant isn't going to go nearly as long as the last one. I apologize. The 20 minutes was not what I was going for, but it is a rant. So sometimes you're gonna, rant longer than you intended. But this is gonna be a shorter one, and I'm gonna rant about the way to actually convert people successfully. Or in other words, miracles are the answer. And so the reason why I'm going with miracles are the answer is because I've been, especially lately, watching a lot of videos having to do with people having philosophical debates on whether or not God existed, whether or not God exists. And I thought about it and I was like, what's the point of all this? I mean, if you look in the Bible, you don't see the prophets of old, going to people and saying, hey, have you ever heard of the um, cosmological arguments or like they didn't do that. They didn't present philosophical arguments to prove God. It wasn't necessary. And even in the New Testament, when Jesus comes around, it wasn't necessary to present philosophical arguments to convince people of God. I mean, if you look throughout the Bible in the Old and New Testament, you'll notice that there was really only one proof of God, and it's a proof that everyone accepted as proof. Now, whether or not they took that proof and took the next step in terms of converting is another story. In some cases, there's probably evidence of people not converting after witnessing the proof. But the fact of the matter is, there is one unified proof throughout the Bible, and that proof is miracles. Whether it's, again, like the prophets of old, like if you're talking about Elijah or Elisha, or you're talking about David, or you're talking about Solomon. Or in the New Testament, you're talking about the disciples or the apostles, or the followers of the apostles. It doesn't matter. The proof is always miracles. Somebody sees a sign and wonder that convinces them that this person is a follower or servant of God. Why? Because you don't see it anywhere else. And in the few cases where you do, it's more so as somebody's using some kind of magic to attempt to mimic God, but at the end of the day, it's just discount. It's just discount politics because there are some miracles that, as you see in Exodus, that cannot be duplicated. That is um, to assume or to imply that the miracle is so grand that it is beyond just mere politics. So um, miracles are the proof of God, even in cases where people can sort of use magic or whatever they're using to kind of attempt to mimic miracles. It's not the same. And so, looking at that, I was thinking about street preachers and how they like to point out, selectively what parts of the Bible they want to follow and what parts they don't. So I was looking in the Bible myself today. I was looking through the Gospels to kind of, or I started looking through the Gospels to kind of have some ammo to add in terms of my conversation right now. And I really only made it through Matthew, but I got to Matthew 10, and I was reading, and there's a part where Jesus calls the disciples, but then he basically gives them the command. I guess you call it the Great Commission, where he sends them out and he says, "Go and preach the gospel," but he also says, "Heal the sick and raise the dead." And what I notice with street preachers is that they'll go and say, look, Jesus commands me to preach the gospel. And they'll go to scriptures where Jesus commands the disciples, not them, to preach the gospel. I'm like, okay, fine. You want to take the words given to the disciples or even given to the prophets in the Old Testament. If you want to take that as words that Jesus commanded you directly, you can do that. But at least be consistent. So you're using the scriptures that talk about using preaching the gospel, which Jesus commanded, but you're ignoring the parts where Jesus is commanding to do miracles, as I said in Matthew 10 or John 14:12. You're ignoring that. So you're saying that you follow the Bible completely, but then there are parts of the Bible that you intentionally ignore because you can't do it. and you ignore it because it brings up a problem. If Jesus commands you to do something, and I hear this with street preachers all the time, Jesus is not going to command you to do something that you cannot do. In other words, he doesn't command the impossible. I'm like, okay, fine. If you want to take it, you got to take both sides of it. If Jesus doesn't command the impossible and he commands you to do miracles, there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it. You can't go to Paul and say, well, Paul says that certain people have gifts, because Paul doesn't overwrite Jesus. You're a Christian, so you follow Jesus. You don't follow Paul. And when Jesus commands you to do miracles, you should also do miracles, because you'll go to Jesus with all of his other commandments. I'm repeatedly hearing go and sin no more, and to go out and preach the gospel. I'm hearing that all the time, but when it comes to the commands for doing miracles, they always leave that out. And so I just wanted to give a little rant, a short rant about that, about how, for all you Christians out there, um, or street preachers specifically, if you're listening, which probably not, to the 2 or 3 people who will be listening to this, if you're a Christian, I'm going to give you some advice on how to be a better Christian. A foolproof way to be a better Christian that will necessarily result in more people coming to Christ. Instead of street preaching or proselytizing, do miracles. I'm pretty sure if you go around healing people who need it, that would undoubtedly cause them to come to Christ if they're not a Christian already. I'm pretty sure it would. Over any philosophical argument that you could muster, or any Bible scripture that you can pull out when it comes to street preaching, doing miracles and using those miracles to help people in need is undoubtedly going to lead to more people converting. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, you're not going to win people over by preaching to them. You're not going to do it. Anytime somebody tries to convince somebody else, what you have to do is you have to connect with them first. That's always how it works. And I know that street preachers like to make excuses for why they shouldn't connect with the people that they're preaching to. By the end of the day, that's how their relationships work. That's how their relationships that they have with other street preachers or other Christians who aren't street preachers is through connection. So they know that's the way to, forming a relationship with people and connecting with them first is the more effective way to win them over. But as I've said before as well, I believe they get a self-righteous kick out of calling people out in their sin. And it makes them feel good about themselves, because it makes them feel high and mighty, because they can say, hey, I don't sin, even though they do, which I've talked about in a previous one. Hey, look at all those sinners out there. I'm glad I'm not a sinner anymore. And you can take advantage of Matthew 7, where Jesus gives you permission to judge others, as long as you're not guilty of the thing you're judging them for. So I think it's just more so about getting a self-righteous kick out of it than actually converting people. Because if it was about converting people, they would focus on connections and having relationships. So my advice to whoever's listening: work on the miracles thing. If you don't know why you can't do miracles, then you have a relationship with God. So talk to God and ask Him, and He should answer you, especially if you're sincere. Figure out how to do miracles, and I have no doubt that you will be successful in winning more people to Christ. So this is the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.